Hey everyone, I hope that you are doing well. I just wanted to check in now that we have finished Module 2.2 and moved on to 3.1. I really enjoyed hearing your ideas and thoughts about Alice Baumgartner's work, um, specifically the ways that the Civil War as well as the U.S.-Mexico War both contributed to the formation of the U.S.-Mexico border. And I know that it's pretty straightforward to understand how and why the U.S.-Mexico War related to the formation of the border, because it was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that ended that war, that actually outlined where the border should go, created the stipulations for it. But we don't often think about the role of escaped enslaved people who were headed to Mexico to look for their freedom. A couple of things that I commented on Medium, and just to take a step back, with the blog posts, I enjoy adding comments that further the discussion, and so I would love to hear what you think when I pose questions there, or if you're posing questions to each other. It's just another way to think a little bit more deeply about what we've written and what we're thinking regarding the readings and the histories that we're studying. So if you have time and you're interested, I'd love to hear what you think about some of the comments I left there. One thing that I was thinking of, and I think this is the main, I'm going to call it a shortcoming. I don't know if it's quite the right term of South to Freedom, is that Baumgartner doesn't really engage with the recent literature about peonage in the borderlands. And so I refer to this in some of my comments as another form of forced or coerced labor. Peonage had a long history in not just Mexico, but also Latin America, dating back even to the Spanish colonial period, because when the Spanish crown outlawed various forms of slavery, specifically the enslavement of indigenous people, and the end of a practice called encomienda that I won't go into, people in the Americas figured out ways to sort of sidestep that law, continue in practice what they had been doing, which was forcing indigenous people to work for them, without breaking the new law. And so all that to say, they came up with different forms of coerced labor that weren't outright slavery. And in some cases, there were actually differences. There wasn't chattel slavery in the same way that it developed in the United States. So chattel slavery is what we've learned about in our U.S. history classes, where enslaved people are seen as property to be bought and sold that have no rights at all. Forms of peonage don't quite go that far. They're based on indebtedness rather than like an inherited status, although debts can be inherited. So this thing could pass from parent to child. But again, it's a different way of tying people to land and forcing them to work on it. Those things did exist in Mexico, even as the Mexican government was saying, we're going to abolish slavery. They're saying we're abolishing outright slavery, the type of slavery that is taking shape in the United States, because the form of slavery was even kind of changing and solidifying in the 1820s, 1830s, when the Mexican government was initially making these laws and these decisions. So again, all that to say, Baumgartner does point out, and many of you did point out, that there were limitations on the freedom of escaped enslaved people when they got to Mexico. They weren't just outright free, however we're defining that term. And there were forms of coerced and forced labor going on, even if many of the former slaves weren't the people who were indebted through peonage. So that often continued to be indigenous people and mestizo people, the poorer elements of the Mexican society. Enslaved people excuse me, former slaves did take jobs as laborers and that sort of thing, but the terms usually were different. Um, so again, just something that I think she maybe could have fleshed out a little more in terms of thinking about the morality of slavery and how different groups of people in Mexico saw the issue differently. Some people truly were morally opposed to it. Others were using it as, kind of a means of asserting some sort of power in negotiations and relations with the United States on a diplomatic kind of international relations level. Um, and in all of that, there is this thing called the border. So I'm excited as we get into Rachel St. John's work this week. I've already started rereading it and just really enjoying it so far, so I hope you are too. But she's looking at the border as an actual character, meaning in Baumgartner's work, for example, and in a lot of Borderlands histories, the border itself is sort of just kind of there in the background as the thing that defines where we're at, but its own history is not really examined in much detail. And this is something that St. John does in great detail. It's explain the history of the border itself and the differences between ideas on paper in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, how things actually played out on the ground, and how both nations tried to assert their power in a place where they most of the time didn't really have any. And she examines this period between the 1850s and about the 1930s, when by the 1930s, both nations do have a bit more of a hold on the border in terms of their administrative power and prowess, but it's still an elusive place. A place in between, a place where, all the things we've talked about in terms of borders and people's experiences there do occur and do take place. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to those of you who are in the 516 section of the class, the graduate student section. Remember, you're also reading Julian Lim's Porous Borders, so we're going to do some comparisons between those two books. I think it made made a lot of sense to read those together. Hopefully you'll see it that way too. But again, looking forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas on how those works complement one another. If you haven't yet submitted your blog post, if you're not quite sure about how to use Medium, please don't hesitate to reach out via email, via text message. I am here to help. We can set up a Zoom if we need to walk you through that. Otherwise, let me know if you have any other questions, and I look forward to continuing our study of the border.